The wind that swept across the plains carried with it the scent of dust, sagebrush, and loneliness. For years, Elijah Crow had ridden those wide-open lands with only his horse, Bramble, for company. The chestnut gelding wasn't just an animal to him, he was a partner, a silent friend who carried the weight of both man and sorrow across endless miles. The frontier could strip a man down to bone and shadow, but with Bramble under him, Elijah felt he could endure anything. They had crossed rivers swollen with spring floods, outpaced storms that cracked the earth with lightning, and survived winters when the snow threatened to bury the very sky. But on that fateful evening, as the sun bled into the horizon like a dying ember, Elijah found something that made him pull Bramble to a halt. There, hunched beside a scraggly mesquite bush, was a boy. Barefoot, his ribs stark against skin too thin to hide them, eyes hollow with hunger yet blazing with defiance. His black hair tangled in the wind, his hands clutching nothing but a stick, as though he meant to fight the whole world with it. Elijah dismounted slowly, his boots crunching against the dry ground. The boy's gaze snapped up, feral, like a cornered wolf cub. Elijah raised both hands. "I ain't here to harm you," he said softly, though the boy's expression didn't change. The boy swayed where he sat. His lips cracked open, but no sound came. Elijah looked around. No camp, no fire, no tracks leading to family or tribe. Just emptiness. A child abandoned to the mercy of the desert. A memory stirred in Elijah's mind, a grave marked by a crooked wooden cross. His little brother, dead at 9 years old, starved in a winter when their parents had nothing left to give. The look in this boy's eyes was the same look that had haunted his brother's face in those last days. The look of someone too young to die but already standing at death's doorstep. Elijah's throat tightened. He reached for his saddlebag, pulling out a strip of jerky. He knelt and placed it on the ground a few feet away. The boy stared at it as though it were both salvation and poison. Then, trembling, he reached out and snatched it, chewing so fast he nearly choked. Bramble shifted restlessly behind them, snorting as if uneasy with the scent of desperation. Elijah looked back at his horse, then at the boy again. The truth was plain. Jerky would keep him alive tonight, maybe tomorrow, but without real strength, without a way to reach his people, the boy would die here. The decision clawed at Elijah's gut. A cowboy without a horse was like a body without a soul. Bramble wasn't just transportation, he was survival itself. Wolves, bandits, distance, hunger, all of it was made bearable with Bramble beneath him. To give the horse away would be to cut out his own heart. But when the boy looked at him again, chewing with frantic desperation, Elijah felt something break loose inside. Slowly, he placed Bramble's reins in the boy's hands. The child's eyes widened. He shook his head, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. But Elijah nodded firmly. "Take him," he said. "He'll carry you home, wherever that is." The boy whispered something in his native tongue, words Elijah couldn't understand, but the tone carried gratitude too deep for translation. He scrambled onto Bramble's back awkwardly, clinging to the reins like a lifeline. Bramble tossed his head once, as if confused, but then steadied under the boy's touch. Elijah watched them ride away until they became nothing more than a shadow swallowed by twilight. His chest felt hollow, stripped bare. He had given away his survival, his partner, his soul. All that remained was the silence of the plains, heavier than ever before. That night, Elijah slept beneath the stars without fire, the emptiness beside him more unbearable than the cold. He told himself he had done the right thing. He had saved a child. That had to be enough. But when dawn came, the air itself felt different, heavy, charged. Elijah rose stiffly from the ground, stretching the ache from his bones, and froze. On the horizon, black dots moved like ants across the hills. They grew larger with each passing second. Horses, riders, dozens of them, no hundreds. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, Elijah Crow stood at the edge of his fence line, staring at a sight that turned his blood to ice. 200 native warriors, painted and armed, lined up before his land in a silence so complete it seemed the world itself was holding its breath. And in that silence, Elijah understood. The boy had not been lost at all. He had been the beginning of something much bigger. The riders did not move at first. Their horses stood in disciplined rows, muscles taut, nostrils flaring, as though even the animals understood the gravity of this meeting. Sunlight gleamed off lances tipped with obsidian and rifles carried with grim purpose. Faces painted with ochre and black revealed no expression, only the unreadable calm of men who had come with a decision already made. At the center of the formation rode a man unlike the others. His hair was long and streaked with gray, his chest bare beneath a cloak of wolf hide, scars mapping stories across his skin. His gaze fixed on Elijah with the weight of a mountain. Elijah's throat went dry. He stood unarmed, save for the revolver at his hip, which suddenly felt as useless as a child's toy. 200 warriors, a tide of vengeance or judgment that could swallow him whole. The leader raised one hand, and the silence broke. A murmur rippled through the riders, low and resonant, like thunder muttering in the distance. Then, from the mass, a small figure emerged. It was the boy. Bramble carried him with steady pride, the reins loose in his small hands. But now, the boy's back was straight, his head lifted high. The hunger that had hollowed him yesterday seemed replaced by something else: dignity, strength, the recognition of kinship. He dismounted with surprising grace and walked to the leader's side. His voice carried across the still air, young but steady. "This is the man," he said in halting English. "The man who gave me his horse." The warriors shifted, their eyes falling on Elijah, as though measuring the truth of those words against the weight of history. Elijah felt heat rise to his face. His gesture, born of desperation and compassion, suddenly seemed small beneath the weight of 200 gazes. The leader's eyes narrowed. He spoke in his native tongue, and the boy translated, "You gave what was yours to keep yourself alive? Why?" Elijah swallowed. His mouth felt full of dust. "Because I couldn't let him die," he said simply. "Not like that, not hungry, and alone." The boy repeated his words, and the leader considered them with a silence that stretched taut as a bowstring. Finally, he dismounted, stepping forward until he stood only a few paces away from Elijah. "My son," the leader said through the boy, "you returned him to me. You gave him what I could not when he was lost. For this I must decide whether you are friend or thief." The word cut deeper than Elijah expected. Thief. He had taken nothing. He had given everything. But in their world, perhaps to touch what was theirs without permission was no small crime. The boy interjected quickly, his tone fierce, protective. He gestured at Elijah, his voice rising. Though Elijah couldn't understand the words, the meaning was clear. The boy was fighting for him. The warriors shifted again, murmurs rippling through their ranks. The leader's face remained carved in stone, but his eyes flicked toward Elijah's empty corral, where Bramble had once stood. "You have no horse now," he said. "You cannot hunt, cannot ride, cannot survive this land. You gave away your life for mine. That is not the way of a thief." Something in his tone shifted, not soft, not warm, but edged with a grudging respect. Yet before Elijah could exhale, another voice rose from among the warriors. Older, harsher, dripping with anger. A rival, perhaps, or a counselor whose heart carried too many graves. He pointed at Elijah, his words sharp. The boy translated with reluctance. He says one gift does not erase the blood spilled between your people and ours. He says kindness does not balance years of hunger, broken promises, and graves. Elijah's stomach clenched. He knew the truth in those words. His people had taken land, lives, futures. His single act, however desperate, could never weigh against centuries of betrayal. The leader's gaze remained on him, unblinking. "Then perhaps," he said, "you will prove what kind of man you are. Not with words, with what you are willing to risk." And Elijah knew the true test was only beginning. Elijah stood in the shadow of 200 warriors, the air thick with expectation. His chest tightened with the realization that this was no accident. His choice had placed him at the center of something much larger, a storm of history, of grief, of debts unpaid. The boy clutched his father's arm, speaking urgently, but the leader silenced him with a raised hand. He turned back to Elijah. "You gave your horse," he said. "Now you will give more. You will stand before my people and show whether you are worthy of the life you saved." They led him beyond the fence line, into the vast circle of riders. The boy walked beside him, casting glances filled with worry and hope. Elijah's boots sank into the earth, each step echoing like judgment. At the center, the leader raised his arms, and the circle closed tight. He addressed his warriors in their tongue, his words rolling like thunder. When he finished, all eyes fixed on Elijah. The boy translated softly, "They will not harm you, if you can endure." "Endure what?" Elijah wanted to ask, but the answer came swift. Two men stepped forward, carrying a spear between them. They planted it in the ground before Elijah. Its tip gleamed sharp enough to split air. "You will carry this," the boy explained. "You will walk with it across the valley. If you reach the river before the sun sets, you will be counted among us as a man who does not give only with his hands, but with his spirit." "And if I don't?" Elijah asked. The boy's eyes flickered. "Then the gift is forgotten, and you will not leave this place alive." The weight of history settled on Elijah's shoulders, heavier than the spear. He looked at the boy, at the father, at the 200 silent warriors whose lives had been shaped by betrayal. He thought of Bramble, of the way the horse had carried him through storms, of the trust in his eyes when Elijah handed him to the boy. That trust demanded something more. So Elijah lifted the spear. It was heavier than he expected, its shaft solid, its balance foreign. He took his first step. Dust puffed beneath his boots. The valley stretched before him, endless and merciless. The sun climbed higher, burning down with relentless fury. Sweat ran into his eyes. His shoulders ached. His knees trembled. Behind him, the warriors followed in silence, a river of judgment watching each faltering step. By midday, his throat was cracked, his vision swimming. More than once he stumbled, nearly dropping the spear, but each time he thought of the boy's hollow eyes filled now with strength. He thought of his brother's grave. He thought of what it meant to choose compassion even when it left you with nothing. At last, as the sun touched the western ridge, Elijah staggered into the river. The cool water lapped at his knees. He planted the spear into the earth and fell to his knees beside it, chest heaving, vision blurred with exhaustion. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then the boy's voice rang out, high and fierce. The warriors answered with a cry that split the sky. Not the cry of battle, but of recognition. The leader stepped forward, placing his hand on Elijah's shoulder. His eyes held no warmth, but neither did they hold enmity. "You have given more than a horse," he said. "You have given proof." Elijah bowed his head, too weary to answer. He had not sought their approval, only to save a starving boy. Yet here, in the shadow of 200 warriors, he understood something deeper. Compassion was not weakness. It was a fire that burned through fear, through hate, through history itself. When they left him at his fence line that evening, the boy rode Bramble once more. But this time, he turned back to Elijah and pressed his fist over his heart. A gesture of respect, of brotherhood. The warriors vanished into the horizon, leaving only the whisper of wind. And Elijah Crow stood alone again, but not the same man he had been before. Stories like Elijah's remind us that true courage isn't measured by bullets or blood, but by what we're willing to give when it costs us everything. A single act of compassion can shift the course of lives, even in a world scarred by mistrust and violence. If this story moved you, share it so others may remember that kindness is never wasted. It echoes through generations like hoofbeats across the plains. And if you want more untold tales of sacrifice, survival, and the human heart, make sure to follow this journey. Because history is filled with stories that still demand to be heard.